In the spring of 1915, as Europe was consumed by the chaos of the First World War, the blood-soaked trenches of the Western Front had devolved into a brutal stalemate. Soldiers dug into the earth, advancing mere yards at a time, paid for by some of the highest casualties ever seen. Desperate to break this deadlock, Allied leaders sought new strategies, new theaters, and new ways to strike at the heart of their enemies. One such plan would lead to the warm waters of the Mediterranean and the narrow straits of the Dardanelles, a campaign that some believed could change the entire tide of the war. It would later be remembered only as a tragedy. The Gallipoli Campaign. At the time, the Ottoman Empire, frequently labeled the sick man of Europe, had joined the Central Powers alongside Germany and Austria-Hungary. While its army was far from invincible, its control over the Dardanelles Strait, a thin strip of water connecting the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara, presented a formidable problem. This chokehold blocked Allied access to vital Russian allies in the Black Sea and allowed the Ottomans to safeguard their heartlands. For British leaders, particularly Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, the plan seemed straightforward. A decisive strike here, they hoped, could have wide-reaching consequences. If they could capture the Dardanelles and Constantinople, they could knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war, secure a supply route to Russia, and open a new front that would alleviate the pressure of the war on the Western Front. But what began with grand dreams and lofty goals was soon to unravel. The Gallipoli Campaign, or the Dardanelles Campaign as it was also called, became one of the great catastrophes of World War I. The plan's first phase called for a naval assault to clear Ottoman defenses along the strait. In February and March 1915, a fleet of British and French battleships began their bombardment of Ottoman fortifications. On paper, their firepower far outstripped that of their defenders, but the reality was far more complex. The Ottomans, under the guidance of German advisors, had heavily mined the waters and positioned mobile artillery capable of devastating counterfire. On March 18th, a decisive attempt was made to break through. It proved disastrous. Several ships struck mines and sank, while others were battered by relentless artillery. With heavy losses and no clear path forward, the naval strategy was abandoned. The Allies realized they would have to fight on land to secure the straits, a far deadlier and more grueling prospect than they had foreseen. And so the second and more infamous phase of the campaign began, the land invasion. On April 25, 1915, tens of thousands of Allied troops landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The invasion force was a diverse assembly, including British, French, Australian, New Zealand, and Indian soldiers. For the Australians and New Zealanders, this would mark the storied and tragic birth of their nation's collective consciousness in war, the ANZAC legend. But the landings did not go as planned. Geography proved to be an unforgiving adversary. Instead of smooth beaches and open terrain, the troops encountered steep cliffs, rocky outcrops, and heavily fortified Ottoman positions. Worse still, poor reconnaissance and mismanagement led to many landing at the wrong beaches or becoming hopelessly disorganized under enemy fire. Ottoman forces, led by the capable and determined Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal, mounted a fierce defense. Aware that Gallipoli could decide the future of the Ottoman Empire, Kemal rallied his troops to hold the line at any cost. His famous words to his soldiers, "I don't order you to attack, I order you to die," capture the grim resolve of those defending their homeland. What followed was a bloody stalemate that echoed the static horrors of the Western Front. Trenches were dug mere yards from each other, and months of brutal fighting ensued. The Allies launched a series of offensives, including one at Suvla Bay, where fresh British troops landed in August 1915. But for all their valiant efforts, they made little progress. Disease, dehydration, and the sweltering summer heat took a horrific toll, with many soldiers succumbing not to bullets, but to dysentery and exhaustion. On the Ottoman side, conditions were scarcely better. Supplies were limited, and soldiers fought on, despite immense casualties and grueling conditions. But unlike the Allies, the defenders had the advantage of knowing the terrain and being deeply motivated to protect it. By the end of 1915, it was clear the campaign had failed. For months, Allied forces had fought tooth and nail without achieving their objectives. They had neither captured the Dardanelles nor inflicted a decisive blow on the Ottoman Empire. In strategic terms, it was a fiasco. In human terms, it was a catastrophe. The decision was made to evacuate, and in December 1915 and January 1916, Allied forces withdrew under cover of darkness. Remarkably, the evacuation itself was a logistical success, with minimal casualties, but it could not erase the bitter reality of the campaign. The toll of Gallipoli was staggering. Estimates vary, but the Allies suffered over 250,000 casualties, including more than 50,000 dead. The Ottoman forces endured similar losses, with around 85,000 killed and countless more wounded. These were not just numbers on a page. They were lives, each one a story of hope, sacrifice, and loss. And for the Allies, Gallipoli was a lesson in overconfidence and poor planning. Strategists had underestimated the Ottomans' resolve, misunderstood the terrain, and failed to coordinate effectively between naval and land forces. This failure would haunt figures like Winston Churchill for years. Though his vision of breaking the stalemate was bold, the disastrous execution nearly ended his political career. For the Ottoman Empire, Gallipoli was a rare success in a war that saw them steadily losing territory and influence. The campaign boosted Turkish morale and cemented Mustafa Kemal's reputation as a national hero. And for Australia and New Zealand, Gallipoli left a complex legacy. Despite the crushing losses, it became a defining moment for both nations, a symbol of bravery, sacrifice, and the grim realities of war. ANZAC Day, held every April 25th, remains a solemn day of commemoration to this day. To truly understand Gallipoli, we must see it not just as a failed military campaign, but as a human tragedy, one that laid bare the costs of ambition, the resilience of soldiers, and the enduring scars of war. What began as a grand strategy to rewrite the course of World War I ended in heartbreak, a brutal reminder that even the boldest plans can shatter against the harsh realities of conflict. As we look back on the Gallipoli campaign more than a century later, we are left with lessons of courage, hubris, and the heavy price of war. The echoes of those who served and died on those shores continue to resonate, a humbling reminder that history's most tragic chapters are often written in blood.